All right, and let's hello again. Let's continue with a few more ideas on how to make clouds. You see here an example of some illustration I did create, and of course there are some clouds back here. And we've seen a lot of different ways to create clouds from scratch, painted ones. There are really many types of clouds that are possible, and perhaps the most beautiful ones are actually found up in Mother Nature. So one of the techniques I wanted to also cover is to start from an existing image, right? And here's an example. It's actually already a bit prepared here. So, but let me just start from scratch here, and you may go and take some pictures outside on a day with beautiful scenery, with beautiful clouds. There may be storm clouds, there may be a variety of other conditions, and perhaps you see something like this. And those are interesting, but you want to understand if it's the proper lighting, right? Some of them may be bright, that's good sometimes, right? And some of them may be the type of layer or low fog. And whatever you need, there's probably some clouds out there in your surroundings that might fit the bill. That might be what you're looking for. There may be some storm conditions, like something like this. And so there are some clouds in here that would be good samples or templates to grab and then incorporate into your artwork. Whether it's this could be a nice panoramic surrounding for backgrounds, right, in a game or in some illustration, or maybe it's something like this, and you just want to grab some of that. Doesn't have to be that entire shape, maybe just parts of it. Sometimes a single picture will give you several pieces that you can extract and isolate as a single as multiple clouds. The thing though to pay attention to also is the lighting. When you see this one here, for instance, you have a little bit of a darkening on the bottom side and some lightening up here. So the sun was probably further up there. And obviously this is great if the scene where you're going to use that is going to have a condition like that where the sun is kind of out of sight and above it, but not so much if, for instance, you want to use a cloud during a sunset and the sun is supposed to be somewhere down here. This lighting here does not fit that bill, right? You would need to do some additional work to change the lighting to perhaps have a bit more of a reddish tint, a brighter tint to the bottom, and darken it in the back up here. So there's potentially some disconnection of what you want to use this for. But the technique will be the same. If you have some clouds that are properly lit and the shading is good, we'll want to just see how to actually isolate a portion of this cloud. Like for instance this one. Let's grab this one, and so I'm gonna go open this and load that into Project Dog Waffle. And this one's a fairly high resolution image, so a lot of it is going to go outside of the screen at first if you have a low resolution screen. Let me go get rid of all the prior images here. Something like this. So I'm going to store this one. I don't know if we'll go back to that. We have it on file. We can quite easily find it again. It might be too small, so too big, excuse me. So I'm going to resample that a little bit. Let's say resample from the image menu. Yeah, it's a 5,000 pixel image. That's a fairly high resolution. In the end, we need only a small. Let's divide it twice in size, so we have something a little bit more manageable. And let's go store that one. Okay. All right. So what we'll want to do is isolate a portion of that, right? And so there's a couple of techniques that we have learned. We can use the paintbrush. You right click on that, you have paint on alpha. The idea is now to simply go and isolate or select a portion of this image, right? So Soft, for instance, would be, okay, let's go select this part and then draw more and select all these parts that we want and gradually fill in the portion that we want to grab. Now, as we get close to the edge, we'll need to use a slightly different technique. Now we could zoom in here and maybe we don't need to go all the way to the edge. There's a soft transition there, and that might be okay to miss for some of it, right? But sometimes you'll want to really get to that very little detail there. So you need to adjust the size perhaps of this brush that you're using for the alpha selection there. Right, so you can gradually go and select, but it's a very crisp selection, right? The edge here is sudden. The transition is either fully selected or on the outside fully non-selected. And again, the reason why I see this turn into pink when it's outside, or this purple color, in addition to the marching ants that you also see here, is because I have enabled the overlay mode. Right? If I turn that off, the only thing you have left there is the marching ants. So I'm going to go, or the marching bands, and I'm going to go turn that in. So that's a technique to simply isolate the portion of the image that you want to grab. And once you have that cloud, this might not be the very perfect selection example, but it's just a start to just understand the concept. Once you have that, you can, once you're ready with your selection, you can go and use the selected as a brush. And if you need to go back to the prior selection, you can undo that. Okay, but the brush still remains selected and you can store it. And there it is. Right. And then you can also show the brush. If you go to the brush tool and click on this little eye preview here, you can see the brush. And there it is. So you have a copy of your brush. It's a little bit smaller now because of the scaling here, the size. I can bring it back to full size, and there it is. That's the extracted cloud from there. But it's a very crisp edge, right? If I clear the selection and then stamp it down here or paint it. Oh, I'm still painting on alpha, it seems, so I need to go turn that off. Let's simply go to the brush and select a regular brush again. Let's say small, something like this. There you go. Clear the alpha. Yep. And then I can go here, select the stored brush, and it's a very small size, and now it's the full size. Okay, so but the problem is that it's very sudden on these edges, right? You see the opacity, and then you see the transparency. There's no fluffy transition, and so we need to find a way to work on that. Let me go turn off the custom brush for a second. So what we want to do is perhaps start from the outside. Think outside the box here, and sometimes it will be easier to select the blue. Not this one. This one has a lot of white fluff on the right edge there too, right? So it's not a perfect scenario, but we can certainly still check the idea and the concept. So what we'll do is we will go to selection and select by hue or color, and then we can pick this blue sky and look for either the RGB difference. That's, in this one it's going to be a bit difficult to really select just the blue sky because not the entire picture doesn't show, but the hue difference might be a place, or the value difference might be a place to pick it. Sometimes you'll want to experiment with that a little bit, especially if you have a sunset red condition. No, the white here is not going to be much different in hue. There is some blue in all of this. The blue sky, the white, there is some amount of blue in there. But if you have a reddish tint for the sunset, then that might help in isolating or separating it. The saturation, that could be a criteria to select it, right? But it's usually not enough, right? You'll need to do some extra paint work. And so that's why we need to keep in mind also the prior tools we used in the earlier tutorials under selection, paint on selection, and then you see the mask here, and you can paint with the left button, or maybe not with this brush. Let's go undo this. Let's use the regular anti-alias pen, or one of the built-in, this one here, like large airbrush, something like this. And there you go, paint this thing away. And you see I have a airbrush here, so the edge, the transition is not too sudden. It might be too fluffy here, right? So you might want to consider that, perhaps to do a little bit of extra work on the brush itself that you're using to paint away the selection. Now again, keep in mind here that I'm actually selecting the sky area. The white part is the selected part. So we'll need to eventually invert the selection, right? But this is a good way to get started. Using the left button, I'm adding white and painting white all over this. And there's a little bit of graininess on that picture here. If you zoom in, it might come a little bit, yeah, you can see it better. So don't forget to do the same thing here. Paint all over that. And you might even adjust the brightness on that, or contrast. Right. But anyway, so here's another technique by which you can work on the selection mask that will eventually be used to indicate what part of the clouds are transparent and what part of the clouds are opaque. And in fact, you see here I'm kind of breaching into the edge a little bit, so it's doing a little bit of a transition. This light fluffy gray is going to do a transparent haze. And for some parts of the clouds, that might be very interesting to use. Right? You might want to ignore the original shape of the cloud. In fact, I'm going to do that deliberately here. I'm going to go and cut away a portion of the cloud by simply making it invisible. Making it transparent makes it invisible. And then here I might want to also have a tiny little bit of transition. Here I'll keep it crisp, why not, just so we can see the different scenarios. So that's the selection mask that I want. I'm going to go and turn this off. Right, so the image is still the same. There still is some gray or light white here. There's some blue, and the cloud with the shading, all is in there. It's just that I have a selection mask now that indicates what part is the cloud and what part is not. Actually, right now it's the inversion of that, so I need to make sure that I invert the selection here. Let's go to selection, invert selection. Now I see the cloud. Right, the rest around it is now hidden. I do still also have a bit of a problem with the selection here, though. The marching ants indicate that there is something still selected. So I want to be careful about that and take that away. If I paint over that, it should go away. Let's see, if I use perhaps the rectangle select, I can use a shift key to add to the selection, or rather the right button to remove from the selection. All right, with the shift key down, that way you are adding or modifying, adding to the current selection. And so that's actually sometimes a good way to do a very quick cutaway of the parts that should remain transparent. Just in case there is anything left around it that still is partly visible. And so now we have a fairly good cloud selected here. And we can simply go and, well, a couple of things. We may want to store this image, which we keep in mind it also stores the alpha, right? So this looks like it's only storing the image, but it also stores the alpha channel. And that means if you were to clear this and erase it or otherwise lose it, you can simply click this. That restores the RGB channel, and then you can pull this little thing down here and replace alpha, and you have the alpha part restored as well. Right, okay, so that's important to remember. The stored image stores the alpha as well. But at any rate, we can now go to a couple of ways. We can use the custom brush selector tool right here next to the magic wand and the turkey baster or color picker. In between those two, there's the custom brush selector tool. And when you click that, you can go and select the portion that you want for your cloud. Right, that's sort of a manual selection, and then go to store that. So here's our cloud in all its beauty. Now there's another way to do that, and that's simply, while this selection is already there, say that's the selection I want, and keep it as tight as possible around it in its tightest fitting bounding box, and then right here go to use selected as brush, and so it's picked this up. It also cleared the selection, but we can go undo that, and so the selection is still there if we need it. But most importantly, we can now that selected area, it's grabbed into the brush, and we can store and manage our custom brush there. You see, these two look very similar, but this one was a manual selection with a little bit more margin around it. This one is coming very tight, close to the bounding box necessary to grab that. So maybe I'll toss this one. This one here I want to also store and keep for future use. I'm going to go to my browse for media and find perhaps a category. I have created my own folder here. You can do that right here, make folder, and then I can save media right in here and say, okay, this is Cloud 2. Okay, so I have a Cloud 1 and I have a Cloud 2. Let's go pin this down so it stays. And I have a couple of experiments I can do with it. So that's hopefully going to help you, give you some ideas on some other ways, other clouds you can create simply by grabbing them from the photos. And of course you might need to work a little bit on brightening this thing here. Let's go back and see how to do that. If I still have that original image, there it is. Let's go and restore the alpha. There you go. If I wanted to work on this a little bit, right? This is perhaps turning too dark too suddenly there, or too bluish. It's giving us that transition, but the selection we did here did not do a transition on the selection. We might want to work on that a little bit. And one way, also another thing we might want to do is actually change the contrast in that image, the RGB channel. Maybe the lighting, the shading is not perfect. Maybe we need a bit more darkening down here, a bit more shadow or shading. So that's certainly possible. You know, we could go with, again, with that large airbrush, something like this one, but then this time make it not paint over that like this, but instead perhaps darken it. So you might go into a subtractive mode. There is a mode here for the brush, and you could say, let's do a subtractive painting, right? So down here, now not so fast, hold on, that goes way too fast. So what we'll need to do is make the the opacity here very, very low, right, so that the amount of subtraction is going to be very minimal there. And then the other thing we also want to do is have the step distance a little bit bigger so it does not repeat that action too quickly. There you go. So now it's very subtle, right, and perhaps still a little bit too harsh, and I want to also have a little bit of randomness to it on the positioning. So let's go to settings, where we have our brush settings, and pin this down as well, and give it some random position there. All right, random position, sometimes random size. Not that it really particularly matters here, but that's good. So now we can paint here and add a little bit of random darkening. You can see how it's just subtly, in a very subtle way, making a little bit of an impact. Maybe the random position is too strong here. Let's go and give it a little bit less of that. There you go. Anyway, so that's an idea on how to darken this part a little bit. And that's, of course, I'm doing too much here intentionally just to like exaggerate it a little bit. You might blur it a little bit. Let's add a little filter here. Box filter, blur filter, Gaussian blur, a couple of different ways. There you go. And then so the same thing up here, but it's, instead of darkening it, we need to brighten it a little bit here. We might also want to blur the selection mask itself. Maybe we'll do that later. Let's first just brighten it a little bit. So instead of a subtractive mode, this time let's go to the additive mode, right? And then as you paint on here, it's going to be very subtle. Maybe we can make the opacity go up a little bit higher, so that the amount of brightening comes through. There you go, a little bit faster. Let's go and change the you know what, I want to change the size of that brush. So since that one right now is probably a custom brush already, I should be able to just resample it. Let's see if we can store it. Yep, it's this big circular blob. So I can actually just make this a little bit bigger this way here, right? And so now I have, oh, but it's now switched back to the default mode. So I need to make sure that the mode is going back here to additive. There you go. And so now with that, we can go to the opacity a little bit brighter and brighten up at the top here. And if it's not doing it fast enough, you can certainly go back to some of these other preset brushes, like the airbrush, let's see, 100 or 200, and make sure that you have a secondary or primary color that's fairly bright. There you go, and then that will just add a nice amount of silver lining, and then you can even add some extras right here, following the lead, so to speak, from Mother Nature, wherever the lighting is already bright. And then you can also, with the right button, add some darkness here, and then brighten it up again, and just finish this to the type of light that you want on this, the type of lighting. That's too much. Let's go undo this. Maybe the interactive undo is comes in handily here. There you go. So let's say we have this. Now we need to blur this selection a little bit here. And in fact, if you want to blur the entire selection all over, one thing you could do is simply adjust the selection or blur the selection. There's a box filter or Gaussian blur, right? So you could adjust. You see how it's doing this pink transition. So that indicates how much of a margin you have due to that blurring. So that's a good technique. Another one is also, as you blur it, you reach out to the darker blue sky there. You don't want that to show necessarily. So what you could do is maybe make it a little bit smaller as well. Go to the selection and shrink it. Shrink the selection, right, by a dozen pixels or so. So then that way your cloud is smaller, but at least you're not picking up too much of that dark blue background there in your outline. So that's one technique. Another technique would be to go and do some detail work here. Right, let's take a snapshot of this first. There it is, and and then do some blur again. Paint on alpha. We still have that shortcut here as one of the brushes. Paint on alpha with the blobby mode, for instance. And well, that one's too big, so undo that and make it a little bit smaller. And then also we need to less random position. That's why it was all over the place. Let's give it just a little bit here. Okay, where's my alpha channel? There it is. Okay, so that was the blur. Let's shrink it first again. I forgot to keep that, so let's go shrink selection, something like this. Okay, and so now I want to do a little bit of corrective painting right on here. Right, so then that way I can bring back a bit more of that crisp transition, but not too much of it. So you can tell there still are a couple of pixels of transitioning here from deselected to selected, fully not selected. Right, and then so that way you get a cloud with a nice respectable transition, but not too fluffy, not too soft. Sometimes you want it soft, and sometimes you want a nice little crisp edge on that. And probably some of the better clouds are the ones that have a mix of both, right? Where some of it looks erratic, some of it looks very washed out by strong winds, and other parts are just very crisp and nicely edged. And so that's one place where you can go with the painting on alpha. And I'm going to leave it with this here. I'm going to leave it at that. So you have a cloud here now that I'm going to simply select with the brush. There it is. You select it as brush and store it. And that's probably going to be a nice brush to use. So, at this time I can paint it. And I'm still painting on the alpha, so again we need to turn that off. By the way, one place where you can turn that off is in the brush settings under the FX, the special FX, you see it's currently on, it's enabled, enable FX, and it's on modal. Which mode is enabled? The modal alpha, right? So to get rid of that, you simply turn that off there. So now it's just painting in the RGB without turning it into alpha. Clear the current selection mask, and you're ready to paint. So really the whole purpose of this was to create yet another cloud that you can use in a composition with a scenery, and you want to add some of these clouds to that. So be sure to save that. I'm going to go call this one Cloud 3. It's very similar to Cloud 2, but it is not identical, so I'm going to keep that for future use. And with that I think completes this tutorial on yet another way to make a cloud become part of your assets of sky elements, clouds of different shapes, different types, that you will want to composite into a scenery with some cloudy skies. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.